If you don't like my rules, leave my house.
Okay, Dad, but tomorrow, don't call me when Rebecca's secrets catch up with you.
What secrets?
The night my father told me to make my 8-year-old son apologize to the boy who had just humiliated him, I finally did something I should have done years earlier. I stood up, took my wife and son, and walked out. By sunrise, my father was pounding on my front door, pale and terrified, because the daughter he had defended all his life had emptied nearly $76,000 from an account he trusted her to manage. And before the day was over, my sister would try to blame me for that too. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Collins. I live outside Columbus, Ohio, with my wife, Em, and our son, Noah. I am 41 years old, and for most of my life, I believed being the easy child was a good thing. I was wrong in my family. Being easy meant being the person expected to swallow every insult, fix every emergency, and stay quiet whenever my younger sister Rebecca caused a problem. That Thanksgiving was the night I stopped. And before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? What country or city are you in? Please leave a comment below, because I would really like to know how far this story has traveled. Now let me take you back to the moment everything changed. My parents' house looked perfect that Thanksgiving evening. My mother, Diane, had spent 2 days cooking. The dining room table was covered with the same cream-colored cloth she used every year. Candles burned beside a bowl of little decorative pumpkins. Football played quietly in the living room. The whole house smelled like turkey, cinnamon butter, and coffee. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family that belonged in a holiday commercial. Inside, the old rules were still there. Rebecca arrived almost an hour late with her 11-year-old son, Mason. Her husband, Tyler, claimed he was finishing a business call and never came. Rebecca walked in wearing an expensive cream sweater, new boots, and the same expression she had worn since we were children whenever she knew Dad would defend her. Mason was already in a bad mood. At first, I ignored it. He took Noah's dinner roll and laughed when Noah reached for it. Then he flicked 2 peas onto Noah's sleeve. "Stop," Noah said quietly. Mason grinned. "What are you gonna do?" Emily looked at me. I gave Noah a small nod, the kind that meant, "You are allowed to speak for yourself." "Give it back," Noah said. Mason dropped the dinner roll onto the floor. Rebecca saw it happen. She laughed. Mason quit playing around. That was it. No correction. No apology. Dad kept carving turkey. My mother looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I should have known exactly where the evening was going. Mason spent the next 20 minutes poking at Noah whenever the adults looked away. Then I heard him whisper, "Broke little loser?" Noah froze. I leaned forward. "What did you say?" Mason immediately looked innocent. "Nothing." Rebecca rolled her eyes. "Oh, Daniel, they're kids." Noah looked at me. He said we're broke because we live in a townhouse. I felt heat rise into my face, but I kept my voice calm. "Mason, don't talk to him like that." Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "He probably heard that from someone at school?" "No," Noah said. "He said Grandpa's house is huge and ours is small." Mason smirked. Dad finally spoke. "Enough. Eat your dinner." Not Mason. Apologize. Not Rebecca. Handle your son. Just enough, as if the problem was the sound of the conflict instead of what caused it. That was my father's favorite form of peace. Silence from the person who had been hurt. 5 minutes later, Noah reached for his water. Mason shoved past the back of his chair. His elbow hit Noah's arm. The plate tipped. Spaghetti sauce and meatballs slid across the table and crashed onto the hardwood floor. Noah jumped up. Red sauce covered one leg of his jeans. Everyone went silent. Mason laughed. That laugh was what did it. Noah turned to him and said, "You're a jerk." Rebecca gasped as though my son had cursed at a priest. "Mason, did you hear that?" Mason suddenly stopped smiling. Dad's head snapped toward Noah. "Apologize." I stared at him. "For what? For calling Mason a jerk?" Emily looked stunned. "Richard, Mason just knocked his food onto the floor." Rebecca shrugged. "Kids play rough." "No," Noah whispered. "He did it on purpose." Dad slapped his palm against the table. "No, this is my house. Noah apologizes now, or all 3 of you get out and don't come back." The room became so quiet, I could hear the television announcer from the living room. I looked at my mother. She stared down at her napkin. And in that moment, something inside me became very calm. For years, Rebecca's mistakes had become misunderstandings. Mine became character flaws. When she wrecked Dad's car at 17, I was told not to make the situation worse by mentioning she had been texting. When she dropped out of college for a semester, Dad called it stress. When I changed majors once, he called me irresponsible. When Rebecca needed money, my parents helped. When I needed help moving into my first apartment, Dad told me that adulthood meant learning to manage on my own. I had accepted all of it because I thought arguing would only create more conflict. But now my son was watching. Noah was watching his grandfather demand that he apologize for reacting to someone who had spent an entire evening humiliating him. I realized that if I stayed quiet, I would be teaching my son the same lesson my father had taught me, that keeping the peace mattered more than keeping your dignity. So I stood up. Okay? Dad blinked.
Okay, what?
We're leaving. Rebecca laughed. Oh, please? Daniel, stop being dramatic. I ignored her. I helped Noah into his jacket. Emily grabbed her purse. Dad crossed his arms. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come crawling back. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. For once, I didn't feel angry. When we left. No shouting, no dramatic speech, no slam door, just me, my wife, and my son walking into the cold November night. In the car, Noah was quiet for almost 10 minutes. Then he asked the question that broke my heart. Dad, did I ruin Thanksgiving? I looked at him in the rearview mirror. No. He wiped his eyes. But Grandpa was mad? Grandpa was wrong? Should I have called Mason a jerk? I thought about it. You could have used a better word, but you were not wrong for telling him to stop. And you were not responsible for what he did. Noah nodded slowly. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. At home, we ordered pizza because Noah was still hungry. We changed into sweatpants, put on an old comedy, and let the evening become ordinary again. At about 10:30, my phone buzzed.
Dad.
I didn't answer. Then Rebecca, I didn't answer that either. A few minutes later, Mom sent one text. I'm sorry tonight went badly. I love you. I stared at the screen for a long time. I typed a response. I love you too. But I'm not pretending that was okay. Then I turned my phone face down. For the first time in years, I slept after a family argument without replaying every sentence in my head. That peace lasted until 7:12 the next morning. Someone started pounding on our front door. Not knocking. Pounding. I got out of bed and walked downstairs, still half asleep. When I opened the door, I barely recognized my father. He was wearing yesterday's clothes. His gray hair was flattened on one side. His face looked pale. Sweat covered his forehead, even though the morning air was cold. For the first time in my life, Richard Collins looked terrified. Daniel. He grabbed my arm. You need to come back. I pulled free. Why? He glanced toward the driveway like he thought someone might be watching. Then he leaned closer. Because your sister emptied the account. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. What account? The home equity account? My stomach tightened. 3 years earlier, after Dad retired from a regional construction company, he and Mom opened a home equity line of credit. Dad had explained it to me once in the way fathers explain things they are proud of. It was an emergency cushion, roof repairs, unexpected taxes, Mom's medical expenses, anything serious. He had said they had almost $80,000 available. How much is gone? Dad swallowed. 76,000. Behind me, Emily appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her robe. What happened? Dad looked at her. Rebecca took it. I stared at him. How? He rubbed both hands over his face. I made her an authorized signer 6 months ago. The answer was so ridiculous that I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, because I could not believe him. Why would you do that? She said she was helping your mother with bills. Of course she did. Rebecca and Tyler had moved into my parents' guest suite 2 months earlier. They said their house was being renovated. I had never seen workers there. I had also noticed Tyler had stopped talking about his job. He had been a regional sales manager. But sometime in August, the company suddenly disappeared from his conversations. When I asked Rebecca about it, she said he was consulting now. Meanwhile, they bought a newer SUV. They went to Nashville for a weekend. Mason got expensive baseball equipment. Rebecca posted pictures from restaurants that charge more for one dinner than Emily and I spent on groceries in a week. I had wondered where the money came from. Now, I had an answer. Did you call the bank? I asked.
Yes.
And? They said most of the transfers were authorized online by Rebecca. Dad nodded. How long? 4 months. Small amounts first, then larger ones. He looked sick. Yesterday she transferred $28,000. Yesterday? He nodded. Thanksgiving afternoon. While my sister sat across from my son, smirking about spaghetti on the floor, she had apparently moved $28,000 out of my parents' credit line. Did you ask her where it went? Dad looked away. That's why I need you. No. His head snapped toward me. What? You don't need me to confront Rebecca. You need the bank and attorney, and probably the police. His old tone came back for half a second. Daniel, she's your sister. And 12 hours ago, you told me I wasn't welcome in your house. That was anger. No. That was a decision. He looked through the front window. Noah was sitting at the kitchen island, pouring cereal. Dad's shoulders dropped. I made a mistake. You made a lot of them. He flinched. Normally, that would have been the moment I softened. Not this time. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door, mostly closed behind me. Go home, save every text, save every email, download every statement, change your passwords, freeze the cards you can freeze. Don't warn Rebecca about anything else until you know what happened. Dad stared at me. You're really not coming? No. His voice cracked. She could destroy us? I kept my voice low. You spent years teaching Rebecca that consequences were always somebody else's problem. Dad said nothing. Then his phone rang. Rebecca. He answered immediately. What? I could hear her shouting from several feet away. Dad's face drained of color. What do you mean, Tyler is gone? More shouting. Then silence. Dad lowered the phone. What happened? I asked. He left last night. Left where? She doesn't know. He packed clothes, emptied their checking account, and turned off his phone. I looked toward the street. The 76,000 suddenly felt like part of something much bigger. Then Dad's phone buzzed again. A message from Mom. He read it. Then he sat down hard on the front step. What now? He handed me the phone. Richard, Rebecca is going through the office. She keeps asking where the property documents are. Please come home. I gave the phone back. Dad stood immediately. I have to go? Wes. He walked toward his truck, then stopped. Daniel? What? His voice sounded lower now, almost exhausted. Will you at least answer if I call? I looked through the window. Noah was smiling at something Emily had said. Less than a day earlier, my father had threatened to cut us out of the family because I refused to force that child to apologize for being bullied. Now he wanted me to become the family crisis manager again. I'll answer, I said. But I'm not cleaning this up for you. Dad nodded. For once, he didn't argue. He opened the truck door, then turned back. You were right to leave last night. Then he drove away. At the time, I thought that was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. I was wrong. At 12:43 that afternoon, Dad called again. I almost ignored it. Then I remembered what I had promised. I answered. Daniel. Rebecca was yelling in the background. You need to come over. She's telling the police you had access to my bank information? I stood up. Emily looked at me from the dining table. What? Dad repeated himself. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I have never had access to your accounts. I know? Do the police know? They want to speak to you. That changed things. 25 minutes later, I parked 2 houses away from my parents' home. 2 police cruisers were outside. Mom stood near the front window. Rebecca was in the dining room wearing the same expensive sweater from Thanksgiving. The second I walked in, she pointed at me. There he is. A uniformed officer turned. You're Daniel Collins?
Yes.
Rebecca laughed bitterly. Ask him where the money is. I looked at her. You're serious? You've always hated me. That does not give me online access to Dad's bank. You work in IT. That was apparently her entire theory. Because I worked as a systems administrator for a health insurance company, Rebecca seemed to think I could magically break into any bank account in America. The officer, a woman named Ramirez, raised one hand, one person at a time. I explained everything. I had never been an authorized user. I had never handled my parents' accounts. I had not known the money was missing until Dad came to my house at 7012 that morning. I showed her my phone. Dad confirmed it. "That's true," he said. Rebecca's expression changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. She had expected Dad to defend her. That expectation had been trained into her for almost 40 years. When she damaged a neighbor's mailbox as a teenager, Dad had paid for it and told the neighbor I might have been driving. When she failed 2 college classes because she rarely attended, Dad blamed the professors. When Tyler's first business failed, Dad gave them $18,000 and called the loss bad luck. Rebecca had never needed to build a good lie. She only needed a lie Dad wanted to believe. This time, though, Mom walked into the room carrying a folder. I printed these. Rebecca turned sharply. Mom ignored her. She handed the pages to Officer Ramirez. They were transaction records. During the previous 4 months, money had moved from the home equity line into 3 accounts. One belonged to Rebecca. One was jointly owned by Rebecca and Tyler. And one belonged to something called TJR Holdings LLC. Officer Ramirez looked at Rebecca. "What is TJR Holdings?" Rebecca hesitated. "Tyler's company." "What company?" Rebecca looked at him. "It was an investment company. Ways." Everyone noticed that word. Officer Ramirez asked Dad whether he had authorized the transfers. Dad looked at Rebecca. Then he said one word. "No." Rebecca exploded. "You said I could manage the account. I said you could help your mother pay bills. You gave me access. That does not mean you could take $76,000? I wasn't taking. Then what was it?" Rebecca stopped talking. The room became silent. My mother asked the question, "Where is the money?" Rebecca stared at the floor. That was when I knew most of it was gone. The truth came out slowly. Tyler had lost his job in August. He told Rebecca he could replace his salary through day trading. At first, he claimed he was making money. Then he lost almost $12,000. He told Rebecca he could recover it if he had more capital. So Rebecca transferred money from Dad's credit line, $15,000. Most of it disappeared. Then Tyler began using sports betting apps. Rebecca insisted she did not place bets herself, but she kept moving money whenever Tyler promised the next transfer would recover the previous loss. $9,000, $11,000, $13,000. Then $28,000 on Thanksgiving afternoon. Dad stared at her. "You transferred $28,000 while we were eating dinner." Rebecca started crying. He said he had a guaranteed opportunity. "There is no guaranteed opportunity," I said. She turned toward me. "Nobody asked you." Officer Ramirez stepped between us verbally before the argument could grow. "Where is your husband now?" "I don't know." Tyler had taken about $6,000 from their checking account, packed 2 suitcases, and vanished. But the final $28,000 transfer had gone straight into TJR Holdings. Tyler was the only listed owner. Officer Ramirez explained that the financial part would take time to untangle. Rebecca had been legally granted access, which made the bank dispute more complicated. But legal access did not automatically mean permission to use the money for personal investments or betting. Dad sat down. He looked at Rebecca as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "I trusted you." Rebecca wiped her face. "You trust Daniel more?" I nearly laughed. Dad looked confused. "This has nothing to do with Daniel." "It always has something to do with Daniel." There it was. The old family script. Rebecca could help lose $76,000 and still make me part of the problem? She pointed at me. "He thinks he's better than us?" "No," I said. "I think people are responsible for what they do." "Shut up." "No." "Daniel," Dad said automatically. The room went silent. He realized it immediately. Even now, with police in his house and his finances in danger, his first instinct was still to silence me when Rebecca became uncomfortable. He closed his eyes. Then he looked at her. "No, Daniel can speak." Rebecca stared at him like he had betrayed her. I did not give a big speech. I did not need one. Yesterday, Mason deliberately knocked Noah's dinner onto the floor. Rebecca laughed. Then you demanded that Noah apologize because he called Mason a jerk. That is exactly how this family has worked for years. Rebecca does something wrong, and everyone searches for someone else to blame. Rebecca's face hardened. My son is 11. Yes. Which means he is still young enough to learn better. She looked at Dad. You're gonna let him talk about Mason like that? Dad took a breath. Yes. Rebecca went silent. Then Dad said something I never expected. You need to leave. She laughed nervously. What? You heard me. Dade, I live here. Rebecca and Tyler had been living in my parents' guest suite for 2 months because of their supposed renovation. That morning, Dad had learned the truth. Their mortgage was 3 months behind. There was no renovation. You can stay until Monday, he said. Then you need to find somewhere else. With what money? A mom answered. That is something you and Tyler should have thought about. Rebecca looked at her in disbelief. My mother had spent decades smoothing over every fight. Not anymore. Rebecca shook her head. You're choosing him? Mom's voice stayed calm. No, I'm choosing myself. That sentence changed the room. Rebecca went upstairs and slammed the guest room door. The officers eventually left after collecting the documents they needed. I stayed because Mom asked me, not Dad. Mom. We sat at the kitchen table while Dad called the bank again. By 4 o'clock, we understood most of the damage. The bank could dispute some transfers, but reimbursement was not guaranteed because Rebecca had intentionally been given access. Dad contacted an attorney the next morning. Then he began doing things I had never imagined he would do. He removed Rebecca from every account. He revoked the financial authority she had over Mom's bills. He froze their credit files. He changed passwords. He hired an accountant to review 2 years of transactions. And that accountant found another $17,000. Cash withdrawals, credit card payments. A personal loan Dad believed Rebecca had repaid. She had not. The total was not $76,000. It was closer to $93,000. When Dad told me, he sounded physically ill. Daniel, how did I miss this? I knew the answer. But I also knew he finally knew the answer. You didn't want to see it. There was a long silence. No, he said. I didn't. 6 days later, Tyler was located in Indiana. There was no brilliant escape plan. He was staying at a motel outside Indianapolis. Most of the final $28,000 was already gone. Some had been lost through betting. Some had been used to pay personal debts. Several thousand remained in an account that was frozen during the investigation. Rebecca eventually admitted she knew Tyler was using Dad's money to chase losses. Her defense was that she believed he could win it back. Dad did not speak to her for almost 2 months. Mom communicated only when necessary, mostly about Mason. And that was where the story took a turn I had not expected. Mason changed. Not overnight, not magically, but the adults around him stopped treating every bad choice like a cute joke. At Christmas, he came to my parents' house for a few hours. Rebecca did not attend. Mason was quieter than usual. No teasing, no comments about money, no throwing food, no trying to dominate every conversation. At one point, I was helping Dad carry boxes into the garage when I heard Mason talking to Noah in the hallway. Sorry about Thanksgiving? Noah looked at him. For knocking my plate. Yeah, and calling me broke? Mason looked embarrassed.
Yeah.
Noah shrugged. Okay, that was all. No forced hug. No adult ordering Noah to forgive him. No big performance, just an apology. A real one. In that moment, I respected Mason more than I had respected several adults in my family for years, because he did something they had refused to do. He admitted what he had done. Rebecca and Tyler separated shortly after New Year's. Their house entered foreclosure. Rebecca moved into a small apartment across town. Publicly, she blamed Tyler for everything. She blamed Dad for giving her access and then turning against her. Through other relatives, I occasionally heard that she blamed me too. I stopped caring. That was another change. For most of my life, I had spent too much energy trying to correct Rebecca's version of me. If she said I was selfish, I tried to prove I was generous. If she said I was jealous, I tried to prove I was supportive. If she said I thought I was better than everyone, I became extra careful not to sound proud of anything I achieved. I had spent years living inside someone else's accusation. After Thanksgiving, I finally stepped out of it. My relationship with Dad changed too. It did not become perfect. Real families do not repair decades of damage in one dramatic afternoon. Dad was still controlling sometimes. I still carried resentment. But something important had shifted. He began catching himself. When Noah and Mason disagreed, he asked what happened before deciding who was wrong. When Rebecca called asking for money, he said no. The first time, I heard the guilt in his voice for days. The second time was easier. By the third time, he simply said, "I can't do that," and ended the conversation. About 3 months after Thanksgiving, Dad called me and asked if I would meet him for breakfast. We went to a diner near my office. He arrived before me. That alone was unusual. Dad normally made everyone wait for him. I sat down across from him. He had already ordered coffee. For almost a minute, he just stared into the mug. Then he looked up. "I owe you an apology." I waited. "Not just for Thanksgiving." That surprised me. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the cup. "I treated keeping Rebecca happy like it was the same thing as keeping the family together." I said nothing. "And when you objected, I treated you like the problem because you were easier to argue with." That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because it was exactly true. I had been easier. I did not scream. I did not threaten. I did not disappear for weeks. I still answered the phone. I still showed up. So Dad had punished the stable child for the chaos created by the unstable one. He continued. "I think I knew she took advantage of us, not the money." I didn't know about that. "But other things." "Then why defend her?" He looked out the window. "Because once you admit you were wrong for 20 years, you have to admit it wasn't one mistake." That might have been the most truthful thing my father had ever said to me. He looked back at me. "I was wrong about Noah."
Yes.
He didn't owe Mason an apology? No.
I embarrassed him. Yes.
Dad gave me a tired smile. "You're not making this easy. You didn't ask me here to make it easy." "No?" Then his expression became serious.
I'm sorry, Daniel.
I believed him. That apology did not erase my childhood. It did not erase Thanksgiving. It did not return $93,000. It did not magically make Rebecca accountable. But for once, Dad knew exactly what he was apologizing for. And that mattered. I accepted it. Not because he was my father, not because relatives are automatically entitled to forgiveness. I accepted it because he had finally connected his actions to the damage they caused. Several months later, we gathered for Mom's birthday. This time we met at a restaurant. Neutral ground. Rebecca came with Mason. She barely spoke to me. That was fine. During dinner, a server accidentally bumped the back of Noah's chair while carrying drinks. Noah moved forward. A glass rattled. Everyone laughed. Nobody shouted. Nobody demanded an apology from the wrong person. Nobody turned an accident into a loyalty test. Near the end of dinner, Mason and Noah started talking about baseball. Dad leaned toward me. "You know something?" "What?" "That night you left, I thought you were being stubborn." I smiled. "And now?" He looked across the table at Noah. "Now I think you were protecting your son." I was. Dad nodded. "I should have protected mine better too." I knew he meant me. I looked away for a moment because I did not trust my face. For years, I had imagined justice as something loud. I thought one day Rebecca would be exposed in front of everyone. I thought Dad would finally tell her she had been wrong all along. I thought I would feel victorious. But when it finally happened, victory did not feel like revenge. It felt like quiet. It felt like not answering every accusation. It felt like my son eating dinner without being told to apologize for someone else's behavior. It felt like my mother saying no. It felt like my father learning that love without boundaries can become permission. And it felt like walking out of a house where I had been told I did not belong, then realizing I had built a healthier home of my own. So let me summarize what happened. My father gave me an ultimatum on Thanksgiving: force my son to apologize to the cousin who had been bullying him, or leave forever. I chose to leave. The next morning, Dad came to my door because Rebecca had transferred tens of thousands of dollars from an account she was supposed to help manage. When the records were reviewed, The damage was even larger than we first believed. Rebecca and Tyler had been hiding job loss, debt, mortgage problems, bad investments, and gambling losses. Rebecca tried to shift suspicion onto me, just as she had shifted blame her entire life. But this time, Dad and Mom stopped protecting her from consequences. That decision did not destroy our family. It exposed the damage that had already been there. And what did I learn from it? I learned that peace and silence are not the same thing. I learned that protecting a child sometimes means disappointing an adult. I learned that boundaries can feel cruel to people who benefited from you having none. I learned that an apology only means something when the person understands what they did. And I learned that justice is not always about making someone suffer. Sometimes justice is simply refusing to keep paying the price for someone else's choices. If you are listening to this and you have spent years being called difficult, just because you finally said no, remember this: being the calm person in a family does not mean you have to be the family's punching bag. Being responsible does not mean you have to repair every mess. And being related to someone does not mean you must accept behavior you would never tolerate from anyone else. That Thanksgiving, my father thought the worst thing he could do was tell me to get out of his house forever. Instead, he gave me the push I needed to stop negotiating my dignity. Walking away did not destroy our family. It revealed what was broken. Rebecca lost the protection she had mistaken for entitlement. Dad lost money he may never fully recover. Mom stopped confusing silence with peace. Mason learned that being favored did not make him untouchable. And Noah learned something I wish I had understood when I was 8 years old. You do not have to apologize just because the loudest person in the room demands it. Sometimes the healthiest answer to an unfair ultimatum is also the simplest. You pick up your coat. You take your family home. And when the person who threw you out appears at your door the next morning, terrified because the consequences have finally caught up with them, you can choose whether to help. But you no longer have to sacrifice yourself to rescue them from a mess they created. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment and tell me what you learned from it. And remember this final line: sometimes walking out of the wrong house is the first step toward finally protecting the right family.